Afternoon adventurers, welcome to the very last of these changes to spells videos. There are only a few letters left, and most of those don't have spells or have very few spells. The exception being W, like there just aren't any U spells, for example. So we're going to be launching right in with V. There are a lot of W spells, mostly because of the wall spells. There are a lot of those. And then there's just one spell that starts with Y that's brand new that we'll talk about a bit to wrap up the series. We are almost through all of the spells in the book. There are over 300. Not all of them changed, granted, so still probably pretty well over 100. I haven't counted the total. Maybe I should have done that. And I'm excited to get it wrapped up, put a neat little bow on it. Anyway, like I said before, there are no spells that start with U, so let's jump right into the V's with the famous bard cantrip, Vicious Mockery. The spell has had its damage increased from a d4 to a d6, scaling, getting more d6s at the usual cantrip levels, and it no longer requires the target to be able to hear the caster. A little bit of a quality of life improvement there. As long as the caster can see the target, that's all that's required. The other V spell that changed is Vitriolic Sphere, and it only changed in that its material component no longer specifies a creature that the bile has to come from, so we can cast the spell using any creature's vomit, essentially, including our own. I don't know if that's ever going to come up, but in a pinch, if you gotta just throw up and then cast a 4th level spell, or higher if you want to upcast it, for a bunch of acid damage, that's an option. Alright, now into the meat of the video, the W spells. This is by far the longest section, starting with Wall of Ice. The wall now has immunity to cold, poison, and psychic damage. It didn't actually specify that before, so that was a little odd. I imagine some DMs probably gave the wall those things anyway, because it wouldn't make much sense for a wall to take psychic damage, but now it's explicitly written in the spell. And for the record, the wall is still vulnerable to fire damage. Similarly, Wall of Stone now has immunity to poison and psychic damage as well. Warding Bond works the same way, but I want to point out that it no longer says you can end the spell as an action, because that is a general spellcasting rule. That's something we can always do with every spell now. If you've been following along with the series, you will have heard me say that a handful of times already. Waterwalk has gotten some great clarifications. Now a creature can use a bonus action to swap between walking on top of the water or swimming through it. So now that is no longer ambiguous about how that's supposed to work. Additionally, creatures falling into liquid that are under the effects of the spell fall into the liquid. There's no longer any confusion about whether they smack into the top of it and take a bunch of falling damage. Although there are rules about taking falling damage by falling onto a liquid, but you know what I mean. Weird now deals 10d10 psychic damage up front, or half on a successful save. It used to not do damage at all initially. And affected targets now make the saving throw at the end of their turn rather than the start, meaning that as long as their first save fails, they will have at least one turn of being frightened. That wasn't guaranteed before, and this is a much better way, I think. Also, the damage turn after turn has increased from 4d10 to 5d10, so that's a little better too. The spell has always been in kind of a weird space where it's okay strong. It's kind of like a better and multi-target phantasmal killer, but as a 9th level spell it has to compete with things like Psychic Scream and Meteor Swarm and Wish. So that clearly wasn't happening. This is one of those spells that I have never seen cast. I've never cast it. At least now it's in a better spot. I still don't know if it's worth that high level spell slot. Windwalk. The caster can now target creatures they cannot see. It is just creatures within range. Targets that are in mist form are now resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage across the board, not just from non-magical weapons, as that's not really a thing that's being addressed in the new version of the rules anywhere, so it makes sense. It's a little bit of a buff in that creatures used to have magic weapons, or attacks that count as magical sometimes, and also things like falling damage, which isn't that relevant if you're a flying cloud, but other things that use a saving throw, or don't even use a saving throw or an attack roll, that didn't get reduced by the resistance before, now do. Targets are also fully immune to the prone condition. They have the hover property, as they used to before as well, but now they are fully immune to even being knocked prone in the first place. And targets have the stunned condition while transforming, instead of just the incapacitated condition. Wind Wall does slightly more damage when the wall first appears, up from 3d8 to 4d8. It's not a massive change, but it is a buff. Wish has changed a little bit, not actually that much, but since it was already so all-encompassing, there wasn't really a lot I'm sure they could have changed with it. For one thing, the instant health effect now affects the caster and up to 20 other creatures, where it used to just say 20 creatures, so technically that's a buff. You can affect one more creature with it, assuming you were going to be one of the targets anyway. There is a new option called Sudden Learning that allows the caster to swap out a feat they have for a different one. This could allow certain classes to have multiple epic boon feats, for example, and that is quite strong. Those classes, of course, being Wizard and Sorcerer, as well as Bard because of magical secrets. The Genie Warlock gets Wish on their class list, and Clerics can now use their level 20 version of Divine Intervention to cast Wish, so they can also do this. Or even if you don't want epic boons, you can just change your build a bit, and that's very cool. And there's also more guidance and more examples for wishes that aren't listed in the bullet points, which is just nice for the player and the DM alike. Witch Bolt is one of the biggest glow-ups that the new Player's Handbook has had. The spell used to be pretty hot garbage for all except exactly one build. Maybe I'll make a video on that at some point. But now it's a whole lot better. The range has been doubled from 30 feet to 60 feet. The connection of lightning between the caster and target now appears regardless of whether the initial attack succeeds. So even if you miss with your attack roll, you can still deal that 1d12 damage round after round. Speaking of, that damage is now dealt with a bonus action instead of an action, meaning that your action is free to cast cantrips or other spells, or attack, or do whatever you want to do with an action like you could normally. And you don't have to use that bonus action to maintain the connection like you used to have to do with the action. The spell used to end if you did anything else with your action. That is no longer the case. The initial damage from the first attack is also increased to 2d12, still gains 1d12 per spell level above first, and still does not apply to the recurring damage. The recurring damage is still just 1d12, but as a bonus action, that's a whole lot more viable. Word of Radiance now has a range of self, so it is not affected by things that affect spells that don't have a range of self. Those are fairly few and far between, but they do apply. For example, Distant Spell used to be able to double the effective radius of Word of Radiance, and now it doesn't. So that's a bit unfortunate. Also, for the record, Word of Radiance was originally in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, for whatever that's worth to you. Word of Recall no longer requires the Sanctuary to be designated in a place dedicated to your deity. It can be anywhere you want. It can be in your church or monastery, cathedral, wherever, but it doesn't have to be. You can just make it be in your house or in your friend's backyard, I don't know. And Wrathful Smite is the last W spell. It is now a prompted bonus action like all the other Smite spells when we hit a creature with a weapon attack or unarmed strike, instead of casting it first and then the effect applying when we hit a creature. As such, it no longer requires concentration. The target now gets to make its saving throws to end the frightened condition at the end of its turn instead of having to use an action, so that's a little bit of a nerf. And the spell now gains 1d6 damage per spell level above first. The spell is also Necromancy now instead of Evocation, which usually doesn't matter too much when the spell type changes, but I do want to mention, this spell can be taken with the Shadow Touched feat now, which is very good if anyone's trying to build a Gish character that otherwise would not have access to a Smite spell. Alright, that is all the W's, now onto the X's. There are no X's, onto the Y's, of which there is only one. That is the brand new spell, Yolande's Regal Presence. I could be pronouncing that name wrong, that is entirely possible. It could be Yolande, Yolande, something like that. However it's pronounced, it is a spell that buffs the caster for a minute, and during that time, they have an emanation coming from them, a la Spirit Guardians, or something like that. It is a level 5 enchantment spell on the Bard and Wizard spell lists, and when the 10-foot emanation enters a creature space, or a creature enters the emanation space or ends their turn there, they have to make a wisdom saving throw, taking 4d6 psychic damage and falling prone on a failed save, half as much damage on a successful save. If they fail the save, the caster can also choose to push them up to 10 feet away at the same time. You don't have to, but you can. The spell is an interesting way for casters to tell the enemies, hey, no, get away from me. And also can knock enemies prone for your martial friends to stab them in the chest. So that's pretty nice. Whether it's worth a level 5 spell slot is yet to be seen. That was the only Y spell, and there are no Z spells that change. The only Z spell is Zone of Truth, and that works the same as it always did. So we're done. That is all 26 letters in the alphabet, and all of the spells that have changed in the 2024 version of D&D 5e. If you've watched this far, all the way to the end of the whole series, you're a real one. Thank you so much. Appreciate the support. Those of you liking, subscribing, commenting on the videos, all these things help so much. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in whatever the next video happens to be. Got plenty, there's always plenty to talk about this game. Whatever the next video will be, I'll see you there. Happy adventuring.